welcome to another edition of Inside the Issues, sponsored and produced by the League of Women Voters Richfield. My name is Maureen Scalia. I am the moderator for tonight's program. I am very happy to have with me tonight Lona and John Healam. As we will see as the program goes on, they have led a very interesting life, one that very few people in the world get to, or at least in the United States, get to live. They've spent many years in a number of different countries. We're going to focus mostly on the experiences in the Middle East, but we're also going to talk about some of the other countries you've been to. Lona, start out. Where did you go after college?
Well, you know, actually, I hope you don't mind if I start when I was a little girl, because we used to have foreign students stay at our house.
Oh,
and
yeah.
You know, it always interested me of people of different colors and speaking these language I didn't understand when I was a little girl. And one fond memory I have is we had an Indian student stay with us.
India,
I think from Delhi, but I'm not
okay.
sure, I think. His name was Abhi. And when my mom was cooking dinner, he used to take us to the Dairy Queen behind my mother and dad's back. So we grew very fond of him. And then he made us a meal before he left, an Indian meal. I mean, at that time, Richfield had takeout Chinese. And that was it. That was the ethnic food in Richfield. And so he made this Indian spread, and we loved it. It burned our mouths, but
I was going to say
we thought it was
curry.
fantastic. And I always wondered why these 5 kids from Richfield liked the food so much. And when you're a little kid, someone pointed out to me, it's who prepares it and whose relationship you have. So because of that, I think is why we enjoyed the food so much. So then that's the kind of household I grew up with, all these foreigners and stuff, and was interested in foreign languages. And then my senior year in college, a woman came to talk about overseas teaching in one of my last classes. And that, to me, sounded fascinating. And she talked about her experiences in Saudi Arabia, which is where I ended up in my last place. So that's full circle, yeah. And I approached her afterwards, and she gave me some information. Oh. And that's.
But then you went to college first, right? After high school?
Yeah, this was in college.
Oh, this was in college.
Yeah,
oh,
yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I went through my life, even, you know, going through as normal people do. You know, I was normal growing up, semi-normal, and in a semi-normal household. And at university, my last year at university, in one of my last classes, this is when they just happened to talk. And then I approached her for information, and she suggested that I spend 2 years teaching in the United States first.
Oh.
So I got a job teaching 3rd grade in Rest City, Minnesota, and then went to the overseas recruiting fair, and that's when I got my first job to Columbia.
And what program was that under?
They're not connected.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
These are all private schools.
Okay, that was just the private.
These are all okay. Private schools. They have their own board. They have their own budget.
Okay.
But they need to recruit overseas teachers.
Yeah.
So Search Associates is the organization that's recruiting.
Okay, I see.
Right. So you've got a group of recruiters that are connected, but each school is its own entity. I mean, there are some schools that have run under the same company.
Okay.
Like Singapore schools have like 6 dotted through China, and a man we worked for in the Middle East has several schools through the Middle East, but generally they're separate.
Okay. So Columbia was the first tour of duty, so to speak.
Yeah.
What did you teach there?
I taught grade 3 at an American school where students had an American curriculum and graduated with an American diploma. They could also choose the International Baccalaureate.
Okay.
So there was 2 courses they could choose from, either the American diploma or the International Baccalaureate. Okay. And it was mostly Colombians that graduated from there.
Oh, okay.
So
the second experience?
Was Spain.
Spain.
Yeah, I liked it so much, speaking Spanish and the culture, and I thought, well, where did all this come from? Or, you know, the mixture, it's a mixture, but, you know, there's a lot of Spanish influence in Colombia. So I spent 2 years in Colombia in the Basque Country,
Oh.
So there was an interesting time there because there were a lot of separatism going on at the time.
I was going to say the Basque, a certain percentage of them want to separate from Spain.
Yeah.
And have for many years.
So, and there's their own language, which is very, they don't know the roots. It's a very
Yes.
different language, right?
Yeah.
A different culture than all of Spain, but of course there's a mixture now. Beautiful area.
That's in the northern part of Spain.
That's right. That's right. Near the Pyrenees.
Pyrenees, yep.
Yeah.
France is on the other side of the
That's
border.
right. And the problem with the Basque is that there's French and there's Spanish. And some of the Basque, also there's different dialects, so it would be difficult to have a Basque country. But
After that?
after Spain, I got a job in Egypt.
And then we'll pursue that a little bit
Okay.
further.
Yeah, that was in Cairo. Yeah.
In Cairo.
And that was an American school. And then after Egypt, I moved to Japan, and I worked at an international school.
Okay.
Well, our paths crossed in Egypt. So
Yeah,
I don't
let's
know.
get
At
caught
one
up.
point, at one point, at this point is where we met. We met actually in Cairo, and he was at the American school, and he had already been there 2 years. So
Okay, John, how does your history and travels?
Well, a bit like my jumping off point was actually the military.
Oh, the military.
Yeah,
okay.
the military. My station I was posted overseas on Crete.
Oh,
Greece.
Crete.
Crete.
The little island in the Mediterranean.
Yeah. Well, it's the biggest island for the biggest
I
Greek.
should
but
say that. It's not little.
Yeah, it's not little. But that was my jumping off point. And I just felt, as soon as I landed, I can remember to this day riding from the airport to the base. And on the main highway, I saw this man with a donkey pulling a cart on the, in the same direction we were going. And I just looked. I pointed the people around me, also the servicemen, said, "Look at this guy." So I mean, it's just it's a total different experience.
Yeah.
And Greece, or Crete, Greece.
Yeah.
It's a. If you've ever been to Greece, it's the smell of the ocean, the white painted buildings, the food, the drink, etc. It was all very new and experience for me, and I just fell in love with it. So that was my jumping off point for interest in working overseas.
So after you, I assume you finished serving your military years, and then after that, did you start heading off to these?
Well, yeah, I mean, very quickly after I finished my military, I actually went to the University of Idaho and majored in geography.
Okay.
And received my master's degree from the University of Idaho. And then I traveled a bit in the Middle East on my own, just backpacking around in Egypt, Syria, and Jordan. Returning home, doing some work for the Forest Service, then I eventually landed a position in an overseas school in Yemen.
Yemen.
In the Yemen. So that was my first overseas teaching experience, was in the Yemen.
And then?
After the Yemen,
Yeah.
I slid next door. And then after that, I worked in the Yemen for 5 years. And then I slid next door to the Sultanate of Oman. And I worked there for 2 years.
And then Egypt?
No, I took some time off. And then I ended up working in Kuwait for 1 year. And it was the same year that Saddam Hussein invaded
Oh my.
Kuwait. So I was there for 1 year, but I couldn't return. His invasion was the 2nd of August, about the time we go back. But
So
obviously,
all his stuff was still in Kuwait.
it was
So-
in Kuwait.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so I didn't.
So you were really caught.
Well,
in
I was
the
caught
midst-
in the States. I couldn't return. But the person who owned the school in Kuwait was determined to continue with the education. So he opened up a school in Cairo, Egypt. And so he actually, I mean, he got a hold of some of the teachers who worked in Kuwait and asked if they'd like to, start a new school. I said, fantastic.
So so you're in the Middle East, in Kuwait, Yemen. What would it be, the 90s, the 80s?
Okay, yeah, well, yeah, I don't
70s?
age myself. From 80 to 85 is when I worked in the Yemen, and then till 87, 85 to 87, I worked in Oman, Sultanate of Oman. Then when was it? 89 to 90 in Kuwait, and then 90 to 95 in Cairo, in Egypt.
Okay. How were Americans treated pretty good those years in the 80s in the countries you were in? How was the feeling?
Yeah, I mean, as an American, I was treated very, very well. I worked in international schools, and to be honest with you, there weren't that many Americans in the schools I worked in. There was quite a few British, Australians, actually teachers from India. It's a good mixture, and Americans were not in the majority whatsoever. In fact, in some of the schools, maybe just 2 or 3 Americans within the system. So I can't really, but as an American, the people treated me very fairly. I really enjoyed working in the country, and I was treated very, very fairly. So I got along with, shall we say, quote unquote, got along with the people very well. I enjoyed my experiences. I never had anyone direct any harm towards me whatsoever.
Okay, okay. Did you live kind of just in a neighborhood, or were you all the people that taught at the schools in one compound?
It was a mixture. When I worked in the Yemen, we each had our own house.
Oh.
So each housing.
You had roommates, though, right?
Yeah, I had a roommate, a teaching roommate.
Yeah.
In Oman, we actually lived on the campus.
Okay.
They kept everybody on the campus. The same in Kuwait. We lived on the school grounds. In Egypt, we had our own apartments. Yeah. So it is a mixture. Sometimes it depends on how the school wanted to situate you.
Describe Egypt to me. Each can do it on their own. I mean, just an overall impression. If somebody says Egypt in a sentence, what would you say? Or a couple sentences, 3 sentences.
I'm going to cop something from a book I read, and it's so perfect. Cairo's the kind of place you cry when you arrive and you cry when you leave.
Explain.
Well, when you get there, I mean, it's just incredibly polluted, crowded, noisy, and there's all this stuff going on. It's just, it's an assault on the senses. But you just, you know, you start to like going to the market and bargaining with, rather than thinking of people following me and bugging me to buy this and that, you think of an opportunity to bargain and have fun and enjoy yourselves. It's just that, I don't know, it's like just different life. I don't know. People are really, really friendly. Egyptians, I'm generalizing, but generally one of the priorities is to have a good laugh and be social and enjoy yourself. So.
You're nodding your head.
Oh,
I'm going to let you expand or add your own comments.
There's a lot of different words. I guess one of the words I might use is vibrant. If you look at the society, there's always something going on all the time. Traffic, arguments, donkeys and streets. I mean, it's a situation where you can look out. It's like a movie screen. If you take trains, which we have done, if you take a train from Cairo down south to Luxor, Aswan, it's just like watching the movie shows. If you go by, you can see the people working in the fields. You go through the villages. You see this young children scramble to the train. I mean, the people smoking on the hookahs. I mean, it's vibrant. Okay? This is a very quick story as a kind of follow-up how the people treat you. I guess in my second year in Cairo, so I was taking some new teachers over to a store they wanted to go to buy some household goods. It was a bit of a trip over. So when we went by taxi. So we ended up going out of the taxi, and the taxi driver obviously charged. He was trying to charge too much. So there was a big brouhaha between new teachers, myself, and the taxi driver. It was quite pretty. In fact, a policeman came by and he actually stepped in. And he broke it up, and then he actually took our side of the situation. Now, Cairo is a very, very big city, you know, and within 2 or 3 days, I saw the same taxi driver. Now, you would think he would be very upset. He was laughing, shouting, said, "Come on over, you remember me? Come on over, I'll give you a ride," you know, the same taxi. So they get very upset very quickly, but they'll cool down very quickly, and it's all in good fun.
Yeah, it's almost like you're expected to him to ask for more and you to say no
Yeah.
way.
Right.
Yeah, you kind of get it set in your mind before you enter into the cab, what you're going to pay. And
Okay.
otherwise, yeah, it'll be way too high.
And of course, the history of Egypt is always there. I mean, Cairo, you're not that far from the Great Pyramids, and then if you could go south, you've got the Valley of the Kings and everything.
It's
I mean, the
fantastic, yeah.
culture, the ancientness of it, I don't even know if that's a word, but the time, you know, the amount of time of history that country has gone through. Did you get that sense? I mean, was it impressive?
I had a thing where I had to do a cultural event every weekend, and I lived there 3 years. So we met. The man opened that school in Cairo because Walid Abou Shakra because of Kuwait.
Okay.
And then 3 years later, I was at an overseas fair, and he hired me, and that's how we met at the school. Yeah. But every weekend I have to do a cultural event, and I was there 3 years, and I still had stuff I still could see.
Oh, wow.
But it was fantastic. They even had classes at the museum, at the history museum that you could go to, Egyptology classes, and that was just fascinating.
And I suppose you got to go see the Valley of the Kings and Luxor.
That's when we took the train down he was describing. We liked it so much we went. You've been there like 3 times? I went there twice. Yeah.
3 or 4 times, I guess, yeah.
Yeah. This time of year, we went at Christmas because it gets so hot in the summer. So.
Yeah, it's not quite Minnesota there. It's about 180 degrees opposite, dry and hot. What were the high temperatures like in the summertime? How hot did it get?
Well, we thought it was funny that Saudis used to come for the cool breezes in August. Living in Saudi, we understood that, but oh yeah, in the hundreds easily.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Egypt, in my mind, there's the fertile kind of neck or whatever along the Nile, and the rest of it is pretty desert.
Yeah.
Is that
And then there's the delta.
Delta.
Yeah.
And
so
the
there's
delta,
that
of
delta
course.
down.
Yeah.
So you can see it if you go to the Valley of the Kings and walk up on a hill. You can see the green strip and the desert going away, and then the delta's beautiful. I only got 1 or 2 trips there. You were there quite a bit, but it's so green.
Very lush.
Very lush plant and crops.
Yes. Yeah.
And the agriculture is probably all the way from almost some of the practices from 0 AD to our mechanized modern equipment.
Correct. I mean, you can still see with the
shadoof?
The shadoof.
The way of irrigating.
Yeah. You take
where they walk on the steps or the wheel that turns and pumps the water.
Yes, that. But you take the water. How do I explain it? You takes the water out of the canal and just places it back up.
With the bowl.
With the bowl.
Oh, so the bowl is just a switching motion, empty, full.
But yes, and that can be an easy wheel, and they can turn that. I mean, you are talking fairly ancient material, but it works. It works very, very well. I mean, for the location they're in and where the water is located, it does irrigate the fields, and they've been practicing the same irrigation, for hundreds of years, and it works for them. So you try to introduce new technology. You're putting some of the farmers at disadvantage because then you're looking at, repairing equipment. They may not have the machinery, the parts to repair with. You're looking at extra expenses, gas, etc. So.
We used to laugh because they had this tourist village for people coming to, called Pharaonic Village.
Yeah.
Just for tourists. And we're like, they're just doing that along the river every day. I don't know about now, but then.
I mean, at one point, obviously, they produced a lot of cotton, but
it was still a lot of cotton. A lot of it was, quite a bit of it was subsistence crop. I mean, crops they would grow, and then they would sell in the market within the villages or within Cairo.
Okay.
I don't know of any major crops they were, except for the cotton, that they were actually exporting. So a lot of it was for there's quite a bit of.
Oh, cotton. I mean, the cotton material was fantastic.
Yeah.
So
beautiful.
There must have been going a lot of cotton, and linens,
Okay, the political system, let's see, you would have been there, Sadat? Not Sadat. Oh,
Mubarak.
Mubarak, yeah.
Mubarak,
That's all right.
that's it.
Well, actually, when you did bring up Sadat, I'm going to, because we were very lucky to hear Jean Sadat speak as a keynote at our graduation.
Oh, yes. We should
She was-
tell the audience who we're talking about.
Oh, yeah, Sadat was, I don't know, he did a lot of modernization for Egypt, right? I mean,
and he signed a peace treaty
Yeah.
with Israel. That
Correct.
was the first time, I believe.
Yeah, and exactly.
And then he was assassinated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Mubarak was then in charge while you were there.
Yes.
Yeah, he was.
Well, you were there, and did you get to know some Egyptian families or people to, a fairly good degree?
Well, our students were Egyptian, so
Okay, so then you had...
they were graduating again. They could choose between American diploma and IB. Could they choose between the two? He was in
Yes.
high school. I was in
Yeah.
grade 5, so
Yes.
they could choose
Yes.
either
Well,
one.
My last 2 years there, yes.
That's
The
right.
school was just open, so it takes time to.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's
You
it.
were put as the first IB coordinator, right? So they could choose, and so 90% of the school were Egyptians.
Okay.
That chose that we wanted an American diploma or we wanted international diploma.
And it was all taught in English, so they
Yes.
had
Yeah.
to...
They had Arabic classes as well.
Okay.
And if you walked down the hallway, you would hear all Arabic. And in the classes, we had to be really strict about using English,
Okay.
because the parents were paying a lot of money for them to
To learn English.
So,
So you got to know the students and some of the parents then?
I mean, we,
Great,
Yeah.
like any teacher does.
yeah, I've been invited to a couple of farms I mean, these are fancy farms. I mean, they grew things, but they also had really beautiful farmhouse. And you got treated. Remember that one? My God. We got there and we had some snacks, and then we had a huge lunch, and then we had to sit around the pool, and then we had to have snacks before we left. And we're just like, oh, no more. So we were treated really well by the parents. Yeah.
Now, these were probably what I would call upper class Egyptians.
Yeah.
For the most part.
And they were they supportive of Mubarak? Or were they happy with the way things were in Egypt? Or were they complaining? Or did they not complain? Maybe they wouldn't complain too. Well, John, you're kind of smiling.
Well, I thought the kids complained about Mubarak all the time.
Yeah, I
Oh,
mean, you'd hear it
interesting.
from the children that there's at least one election, well, if I'm trying to remember correctly, there's at least one general election, and of course Mubarak at that time garnered like about 9% of the vote, but nobody really believed that the
That was
the
accurate.
90% was actually 90%. I mean, the
Or
children would come in,
90% of the people that actually voted.
right, or the number of
Right.
people voting.
No,
Yeah,
the kids, the
who
fifth
voted?
graders were laughing about it. So you could just,
So the democracy was really not existing at this time.
yeah. We
Well-
were there about halfway through his, what I call reign.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't an open system like we'd have here in the States by any means. It was basically a situation where you would have Mubarak run against a few others, but it was basically handpicked who would run against him.
Token opponents type. Okay.
But there wasn't like, I mean, people could talk freely. I mean, there was some, what we would consider constraints religiously, or adherence to religious beliefs.
Yeah,
But there
talk
wouldn't be this fear of political, I mean, it was a democracy and it was open. Didn't you think?
As long as you
Kids
didn't
talked
want to
about-
overthrow,
Yeah, I mean-
actively,
Yeah.
you weren't actively engaged in overthrow.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, yes. I mean, in a sense, you could, like you say, the students could talk about it. I mean, it was kind of an open. Even the shopkeepers you would go to would laugh about the situation. They'd tell us, no, Mubarak, no. In fact, someone would say, no, he's no good. But they'd speak about it in a somewhat lower tone, but they would speak about it. There was nobody on the streets watching.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, I think it just became more of an issue because of the middle class not being able to make ends meet in the last,
So,
at that time they still could, but by the, for the Arab Spring. Well, we always kind of said to ourselves, us foreigners, would think, God, it's amazing how much they cope with and still smile and laugh. Crowded conditions, pollution. There was one guy who had a law degree that was working in our canteen selling potato chips to the kids.
So in other
No.
words, the educational system allowed them to get an education that in this country probably would give them a pretty good living.
Yeah.
But there wasn't a niche for them, and so many of these young men, even though they had great education, were doing low-paying jobs. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
So there wasn't a real...
And also Nasser, with his socialist ideas, promised a lot of people jobs, right? He gave them, so it became really top-heavy government. Because Nasser was the president before Saddam.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't know about, I know you know, but so and another frustration was the laws, the heavy laws. I don't know about now, but in order to get married, you had to have everything set up. You had to have apartment purchase. You had to have the furniture. Usually the wife's family provided the furniture, but there was all this really heavy stuff going on and difficult to make, you know, to follow all these rules, yeah.
So it seems to me you're talking about a very frustrated young adult group of people.
Yeah.
I
Well,
mean,
yeah.
they weren't able to find the employment necessary to even allow them to get married in some situations.
Yeah, in many cases that is correct, right? They didn't.
So I think we were still there when it was kind of okay, but it just started getting, you felt a difference in the 5 years by the time you left with traffic and how
And
things
you can
were
see,
going.
yeah, yes, you can see problems growing.
Starting to...
The infrastructure. I mean, simple things simply like transportation. We lived in a neighborhood when I first moved into it. You could actually sit down the streets in the cafeterias outside, you know, and enjoy some meals. And when we left, there was just no way you could sit out there. It was just too much traffic. It was just in too many people. So it was a growing concern was the infrastructure was becoming much more of a problem.
Just all breaking down a little bit.
Well, instead of it was breaking down, it was also expanding, but expanding, you know, in directions you hopefully wouldn't take. Like
The quality of life maybe was suffering because of where, and that probably is also, I would imagine, you know, more people and more people were coming to Cairo from the rural areas.
And it's
and that
constricted
just-
because of you have to stick with the fertile area.
Yeah.
And it reminds me, you were there during the bread riots, and what year was that?
Oh,
no,
what?
this was 70. This was in 76.
When he was
1980.
backpacking through.
Yeah, what happened?
The bread, the government, it's subsidized bread. Oh, it's great bread. You wait in line for it. I used to wait in line for it because it was cheap and it was really good, fresh stuff made by the bundles full. Yeah. And women could go right in front, so most of the time I didn't have to wait in line. But they raised it by 2 piastra. Is that?
Yeah, well, it was like a half a penny.
Okay.
They
For
raised it
X
by half a
amount.
penny.
And
There was riots. Well,
actually,
you were
at
there.
that time, there were riots, and they actually did. The government was forced to bring down the price, put it back to where it was, rather than raising it by the half a penny. But that kind of shows you the discrepancy, well, the wealth.
Yes.
Should we say, is for the average person to really be that upset over raising the price of bread by half, and basically half a penny or a penny at that time. And they did, because they couldn't afford it. So they actually did shut things down. And after a couple of days, the government, again, they put the price
So we're
back.
talking about a country with maybe not a very big middle class, you know, a few
Well,
wealthy.
I think that's
then-
what's different. I think they were protesting for that half a penny, and it was the working class, which was huge.
Okay.
Where now I think it was affecting everyone. I mean, I understood everyone was on the street. Lawyers were on the street. Poor people, weren't they? It wasn't everybody on the street during the Arab Spring.
Arab Spring.
So I think it's affecting. That's what I'm thinking is different.
No,
It's different, right? Just because.
Okay,
yeah.
let's talk a little bit. I mean, you weren't there at the time of the Arab Spring, right? You
No.
No, we were thankful for that.
Yeah. Did you maintain any communication at all with anybody in Egypt or people?
It's a pity we didn't. We wrote letters for a while. If we had Facebook today, we would. Because I've got Facebook friends. I mean, since the Facebook started, I'm keeping contact with those. Well, since email, because they've transferred now to Facebook.
Yeah.
But some of our friends, some of our really local friends didn't write or read English.
Okay.
Actually, the owner of the school's daughter, you keep in contact.
Is the school's
Well, no, actually, I know where she's at, and I keep in contact with her through another person, not directly with her.
Is she still running a school, or is the school
No, she doesn't. She works with children. She's not running. She's not in.
school?
Not in the particular school. No.
Is the school still there?
Yes.
Okay,
Further
so
north,
that
it's
is
still
still
there. It's
functioning.
now that's a very good question, and like I say, we really this is what 10 years.
Oh, his
Oh, gosh,
10,
no,
it's
more
15
than
years,
that.
almost 12.
Well, we
14.
met before we were married.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think when
So,
we left in
so
95.
you're on the wire now for how many years you've been married?
Yeah. Anyway, we haven't kept that good a contact. So during the shutdown, during the Arab Spring, when things got very serious, and they were simply saying, do not go to Egypt, and they were flying out, some nationals were flying out, some countries were flying out their nationals. I do not know what happened with the school that we used to work at. So I'm not sure of the situation today. My assumption is it's still operating,
Okay.
but I do not know.
We could ask. I have a friend there now, and we were keeping track with her. We were keeping track. She was at home.
Okay.
She had gone home to have her baby, so she was home. But a friend of mine in Saudi, she was half Egyptian, half Saudi.
Oh, so
And her family, they were worried about getting to the store. They were afraid to go to the store and get food, and the food was running out. So it was really a really
tumultuous time.
difficult time.
The Muslim Brotherhood ultimately won enough to claim the presidency of Egypt, although did they really reflect the majority? It's kind of, anybody's guess. Was the Muslim Brotherhood, were they in existence at the time you were there?
Well,
And what was their whole point?
well, their point is they want Sharia. They want the Islamic law to be the secular law, like it is in Saudi Arabia and some other countries too. I think Sudan is also, yeah. Where up to that point, Egypt was secular. It has been for forever, I think, right?
Well, since
Yeah.
the British,
Yeah.
probably.
Yeah. And so while we were there, my first year there was an earthquake. And in true Mubarak style, he didn't help as much as he should have. Of people in the South, they had a terrible, terrible time because there wasn't enough water, enough food. The Muslim Brotherhood came in with blankets and food, and they think they were waiting for some event so that they could get a bigger following. So I think that was a catalyst for them getting a foothold into
Well, they
Egypt.
saved people's lives, so
Yeah.
you would expect
Yeah.
people to
Yeah.
support them.
Yeah.
Plus,
So,
are most Egyptians Muslim?
yeah, 90%.
Yes.
By far the
Yeah,
majority.
85, 90%. I
Okay.
think 10% are Christian Copts.
Yeah.
Okay, so they're heavy, heavy. But they never had, when you think of Egypt, they never had the rules about the women to be fully veiled and all of that kind of stuff. The dress code, I guess, for
Yeah, the
one
dress
of the broader
code, yeah.
rules, wasn't as strict. Am I correct?
Yeah, in fact, you see old Egyptian movies and you wouldn't even know it was Egypt because they're not even wearing scarves. Now, when we were there, we saw a higher percentage of women wearing scarves. When I first came, I would say half of the women wore scarves if you just randomly took a check.
And these
by
were
the
simple
Yeah,
scarves
some
and not the
some
whole.
beautiful, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, always the face. I don't know an Egyptian woman that had her face covered. Do you? I
No.
mean, it's just people if a face was covered, you would say they're from the Gulf. You
Okay,
would
they
say
were traveling.
immediately,
They were
yeah.
traveling, right.
You would say they're Gulf people, yeah. But by the time I left, I would say 75% to 80 wore a headscarf. What do you?
It's quite a high majority. I don't know what exact
Yeah.
percentage, but it became much more. A larger percentage were definitely wearing the headscarves.
And then you get into fashion too. Sometimes it's fashion, right? it was the fashion then to.
You think it was
Yeah.
more fashion than
No, I don't,
actually
but
religious?
It kind of goes hand in hand,
Yeah.
but I think part of it, unfortunately, was women felt more comfortable on the street with their hair covered. Yeah.
Okay.
But I mean, like my Arabic teacher, she never wore a scarf.
Okay.
She'd go anywhere and she
She'd be just dressed in,
yeah.
you know, almost
Yeah.
Western.
But in Egypt, we felt comfortable showing our elbows, and all Egyptian women do too. But generally, we would wear a skirt below the knee.
Below the knee.
Below the knee was more appropriate, yeah. And we didn't wear shorts around on the street. But if you're
you're
reasonable, it's fine.
respectful
Yeah,
of the
yeah,
culture.
yeah. Then it's fine.
Correct.
And for the man, it really didn't matter as much.
Well, you should still, I think it's still a sign of respect. I mean, a few of the teachers would wear their cutoffs or their shorts. But for the most part, you'd wear jeans, whatever, just
Or
as a sign of
long.
respect.
But very rarely Egyptian man in pants.
No,
in
very,
shorts, yeah.
yeah. They may, yeah.
Okay, so you think now we're back into the days of Mubarak, more like Mubarak with the new guy, I forgot his name, I can't remember, who overthrew,
Oh, and
well,
the
the army overthrew Morsi and put somebody on top. You think we're more like Mubarak, and maybe it's a
back.
dot?
It seems to me, well, I mean, if you're looking now at holding public restrictions on demonstrations, on how many people can gather, etc., you still got somewhat of a curfew in place. It's back to basically government. Well, it is. It's a government, the army holding the ground for now. So it's more like
That's different, though, having army control rather than Mubarak controlling.
Well, yeah.
But
Yeah.
you meant in the sense that people are unhappy with the government. Is that what you were referring to?
Well,
Yeah.
I'm trying to get a feel for, you know, whether you guys thought that we're more, well, I guess the army would be different than Mubarak. Mubarak had the support of the army, but he wasn't army per se.
Correct.
Okay, so that's the difference.
But he had the strong support of the army.
He was
is basically.
President.
Yeah. And what we've got now is actually somebody put in place and under the control of the army for all, as far as we can tell.
Yeah. Well, he is. Yeah. I don't know the individual's name. I can't remember the individual's name.
I'm blanking on it.
but,
So. Well, this is very interesting. So that was Egypt. One thing I wanted to ask before we left and went to Saudi Arabia, Syria. Well, you were backpacking through Syria. Was Assad the president or the
the
leader?
father. Yeah.
His father was.
Right. This is in the 70s when I was back.
In the
And I was
70s.
there. It was only for about 2 weeks.
Oh,
At the time. I
okay,
spent
so-
most of my time in Egypt, and probably about a month and a half, 2 months in Egypt, and the rest of quite a bit of time in Jordan. So Syria was just coming in and out
Okay.
very quickly for a couple of weeks.
Okay, because boy, that sure is one torn up country these days.
Unfortunately, yeah, I mean, it's very unfortunate.
And you can't really get, like I have a friend that I worked with in Saudi Arabia. She's on Facebook with me. But I don't think she can really say,
Anything.
you know, things are fine. Yeah, I mean, and she doesn't live there right now, but she goes home when she can. And you can't really say too much otherwise.
Yeah,
So you don't really know what's,
going on.
yeah.
And I think it's Turkey and Jordan that has a big immigrant population from Syria. I mean,
Yeah, that's
just
correct.
Hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions. So.
In Jordan, oh, it's such a small country, but they're so welcoming. They have this Bedouin culture permeate throughout the country, and just loved Jordan. It's just, I love the people. And
They, you know, we tend to clump them. Oh, that's the Middle East, but they really are unique.
different. You know, like people do that with Africa. They think
Yeah,
just
South
Africa or just
America.
Middle East, where they're
Yeah.
each place has its own personality and dialect, and yeah.
So Saudi Arabia, what years were you there? Years 2000 to
2008 to 2012,
12.
4 years.
so
4 years.
And very recent. I mean, that's
Yeah.
a year ago.
Yeah.
Right.
So this is We've been home a year and a half, actually. So, yeah, it's pretty new still.
Okay. Now, the experience of Saudi Arabia was very different from Egypt. I mean, there you really do have strict Muslim law in Saudi Arabia. Very different way of life. And I believe you guys lived in a compound of where only foreigners live, pretty much?
Yeah, we lived in, actually, if a bag, it says Arabian homes. So we felt we were really lucky that we got on Arabian homes, because a lot of the teachers lived in the compound where the school is, where we lived off.
Oh, you were off the
But we were on a compound, but a compound run by was owned by a Saudi, but it was British management.
Okay.
And there are people from all over the world in this compound. So you weren't necessarily surrounded just by teachers.
Okay.
Some people were there because they were engineers, or there were, what are some things they did? I mean,
Well, a lot of it was, I think, they work within the government of Saudi Arabia. Let's say accountants.
Oh.
So, I mean, they were basically some of the. How do I want to say?
I mean, you'd meet someone who's head of transportation of all of Saudi Arabia. I mean, you met really
So
important
the
people living in
Saudis-
this compound with you.
So the Saudis kind of hired people from other countries to do a lot of the day-to-day business of government.
That's correct. But they're just now undergoing, within the last, well, they've just now instituting a process called Saudiization. And they're really clamping down the number of foreign workers that any one company can have. And in fact, they're now seeing a number of the people who work in Saudi Arabia being asked to leave. I mean, they do have to leave. They no longer will renew their passports or the visas. So they want the Saudis to kind of take over some of the work that we call the expatriates have been doing.
And provide jobs for their own people.
That's correct, right.
Okay. That was pretty much par for the course. The foreigners had their own areas, quote unquote, to live in. Basically, very few lived amongst the...
A few of the
very,
teachers,
very few.
but very few.
I met a couple of guys that they took their company allowance and then went and moved into an apartment because they could pocket that money, right? And they liked the experience of living in a Saudi apartment building. A female wouldn't do that. You just wouldn't.
So, what is it like being a female? Sorry, John, but we're going to turn to Lona. What is it like being a female in Saudi Arabia?
Well, I thought I'd bring this. I had to wear an abaya. Whenever I left the compound, I wore an abaya. So this is just a black, like a cloak, which covered, which covers your form. And they can be as fancy as you want or as plain. So I liked being fancy.
Oh,
So I
that is
had
pretty.
It had a border. Yeah.
Yeah, we probably can't because of the microphone.
Yeah.
Oh, right,
No,
right.
it's in
Okay,
there.
anyway. So that would cover your whole form. I saw some really beautiful ones. I mean, Louis Vuitton that costs, thousands of dollars.
Because of all the fancy...
Yeah. Or you could get a very
Needlework.
simple one for like $5. It's up to you. And that would cover your form. As prepubescent and, well, the
The young
prepuberty,
girls.
yeah. They could wear pretty much what they wanted. Even the little girls would wear skirts and stuff. But then when you were in middle school, you would wear the same thing as I would.
Okay.
I was on the same level as middle school girls, where you wouldn't have to wear a headscarf or cover your face,
But you'd
but you would wear the gown.
form.
And then once you hit puberty, you would cover your hair. And then if you were a really strict household, you would cover your face. So you would just see the eyes. Some very orthodox women would cover their hands. They'd have gloves on, black socks, and you'd only see their eyes.
Oh, sometimes you wouldn't even see the eye. I mean, they
And and they would have some. That's right. I'd
Yeah,
forgotten.
they had a
all
kind
veil
of a
over.
veil
Over.
net material over the eyes.
Yeah. And then there's a lot of Saudi women that would show their face. I mean, some of my Saudi friends, they would just cover their hair out in the street, and then even if I met them at a restaurant, they would even take off their
The head covering.
head covering, depending on who they were with. But that was Jeddah. Jeddah was a modern city, relatively speaking.
So when you went out, how much you just covered your head and hair?
I didn't cover my head or hair.
Oh, you didn't?
I did not. I just wore that gown that I showed you.
Okay.
I just wore the gown.
And that was okay?
That was fine. In fact, our first traveling trip, when we went traveling, I wore a headscarf. And I got kind of funny looks, like, what is this Muslim woman doing with a foreigner?
American man.
You know, nothing
white
happened,
man.
but I felt more comfortable everybody knowing I was Christian.
Okay.
I mean, people just knew, okay, she's Christian and she's not acting like everybody else.
You're
Which
not
is,
wearing that.
Okay.
you know what I mean? Because I wasn't.
You weren't pretending to be Muslim if you didn't have the head.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I just found it. There are certain areas in Saudi I think it's better to cover your hair, but generally where we were, I just felt like I was better off not wearing a scarf.
So you would go to the markets, though, that all the Saudis went to in the
Yeah.
neighborhood? I mean, you'd leave the compound and go.
Yeah, I mean, I used to go out on my own all the time. Because I loved Arabic. I loved speaking it, and I loved being in Cairo. I learned Arabic, and then when I was in Saudi, I started coming back.
Okay.
And I think that's helped when you get into a cab and you're able to speak some Arabic. Just traveling, my experience of traveling, I just have an air about me. I think I didn't have any trouble. I wouldn't be foolish.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't just go anywhere like you would here. You be careful where you're going,
Yeah.
especially at night. But I felt comfortable on short trips on my own. Now, I wouldn't go, like we used to run out in the desert. There'd be a group of us, and I'd wear the abaya, and then we got to the desert, I could wear shorts and a T-shirt. For example, I wouldn't take a taxi on my own to a remote area of the desert on my own.
Okay.
So just being sensible, really, yeah.
A man in Saudi, an American man in Saudi, how did the people receive you? Did they?
Oh, the people, I mean, every country I've worked in the Middle East, the people are very receptive. They're very kind. I have absolutely no, you're received very well. But, I mean, you do apply common laws. I mean, every time I went out, I'd always wear jeans, no matter what the temperature was. Even I used to go running in jeans. It's just respect for the culture. So long as you respect the culture, you're fine. I had no problem. And the similar situation as in Egypt, I got along with the people. I felt very well.
So no real anti-American per se that you could.
Not out in the. We get notices from the embassy.
Okay.
Saying, watch this, watch where you're going, et cetera. But, I never feared for my safety whatsoever. We were told a few times, kind of watch getting near big crowds. Don't always go in the same streets all the time, kind of vary your routine, et cetera. But I've never really feared from
And that
my
may
own
have
safety.
been as not just terrorists, just
It's
like
common.
we have in certain areas of the metro area.
Right.
Well,
You gotta be careful.
that reminds
Sure.
people, goes, weren't you scared to live in Saudi Arabia? Weren't you scared to live in these places? But the first, I told you before I worked in Rush City. So my first full-time job as an adult in the cities was just this last year and a half. The first couple times I was driving to work, listening to the accident report, I was terrified. It's like, why does anybody even get in their car here? So it gives you a perspective of what the media can do. They're just reporting accidents that happen in the Twin Cities, but so yeah.
Perception is not always reality. I mean, we have this idea, and I think there, especially after 9/11, there was a lot of anti-Muslim feeling.
But if you got a feeling for Saudi Arabia, there's a movie. The first Saudi Arabia ever made. It's called Wajah, about a girl who wants to get a bike, and about her adventures. But when I was watching this movie, I was thinking, oh, how much I miss the language and the warmth and the generosity. There's just, and I am going to generalize now. If you go to Egypt or the Gulf or Turkey, you just find this warmth, and I think I don't know if it's being in the desert, and you've traditionally, a long time ago, whether you're an enemy or a friend, you had to feed them for 3 days and give them water. I mean, it's a long Bedouin tradition, and I just feel like that warmth is like something I kind of miss. Yeah.
And that needs to be brought to people's attention, I think, that, you know, just because we don't agree with somebody either for religious reasons or political reasons, the people are the people and are just as maybe even more welcoming, I mean, than,
Oh, yeah.
than some.
Oh, no, when a girl was in need, because I had Saudi girls, because it wasn't segregated school. But when somebody needed a pencil, all the girls would rush around and get out their pencils, or if somebody was hurt, I mean, it's just this caring that I really think it's...
But obviously there's tension always again with the strict and the less strict. And just there was an article in the paper a couple of weeks ago that there was a day of protest where women, the wealthier women I assume, who owned cars or family had cars, they drove, and some of them had their husbands right behind them. And there seems to be a little bit, at least among certain segments, of a little bit of wanting to loosen some of these restrictions on women. Could you see that coming or starting to happen, or any comments here?
Well,
the women could be in the legislature, right? Or they can
they
vote
will
in the...
be, yeah. I
and
mean,
they
the
can
king
vote.
is making, he's making an effort to become more inclusive, especially with, you know, with the women. So it's slowly, I mean, it's very slow, but it's slowly opening up towards where there's more opportunities for women to become involved within society, even if it just means driving, so you can drive your husband to work, or if you have to make an emergency to pick up medicine, or pick up, you know.
Take a kid to the doctor.
Right, correct. So there's a little bit of openings there. Yes.
What did impress me this time is that the men were being involved.
Yeah.
More so than in the
the
past,
immediate
I think.
family, yeah.
So you think there's a little bit of change coming about there for right now
Shwaya,
anyway?
a little,
Shwaya.
yeah, a little
Means
change.
little. Yeah,
It's not-
you have to be careful because of if you go fast, then you're going to...
Yep, they'll rebel against it.
And there's the clergy that are very strong there, so, yeah.
Yeah. Let's see, Iran has SAR, and Saudi does...
Sharia.
Sorry.
Now you're making me say it wrong. Sharia.
Sharia.
The Islamic
Shia.
law.
No,
Oh, I'm sorry. You were talking about Sunni and Shia. Sorry.
No, I was talking about the law.
Okay, all right.
Sure.
How about like Kuwait and Yemen, when you were there, did they have that also? Or not so much, or not to the extent of Saudi Arabia?
Not to the same extent as Saudi Arabia. I mean, they were strict, but they weren't. I wouldn't say not to the same extent as Saudi Arabia. Though Kuwait is fairly close to, I'd say the same as Saudi Arabia.
Okay. Let's see. There was another question, and then So talk about let's talk about a little bit. In many ways, you still have the basis of a tribal culture in some of these countries. Let's face it, some of them were carved up as the British and the French were withdrawing, and there was no thought to, for instance, the what is it? I want to say Turks, but it's not. It's Kurds in Iraq.
Oh, yeah.
Iraq. Yeah. There was no thought to following the traditional tribal. Sunnis and Shiites. I mean, that was a big part of Iraq's issues. And I think also in Iran, there's a little bit, and Syria, some of these countries are, one's more Shiite than Sunni and vice versa. Whatever you know about them, explain the Shiites and the Sunnis if you can.
Well, first off, Iran is very Shia. The two major sects are Sunni and Shia, and Iran is very Shia. Syria was a branch of the Shia. Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states are very Sunni, and it's a major split within the religion. And I mean, really, if you take a look at Iraq today, if you look at who's the bombing that's out there, if you look at the number of people killed, it's basically what I see as religious war, Sunni Shia. to try to establish a dominance within the area.
And, before the show, I was kind of talking a little bit, too, of the, and we certainly have had that in Christianity, too, where the Protestants and the Catholics fought. So this has occurred elsewhere. It's not just unique to Muslim thinking.
No, that's true. But
So
they've, I mean, unfortunately, today's Middle East, it is very much a Sunni-Shiite split. If you take a look what's going on, okay, well, within the last day, we signed this agreement with Iran to reduce the nuclear capacity. And if you look at the states who are against it, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, Israel, interesting enough, to join this pact, because they're very, well, Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states are very Sunni, and Iran is Shia, and it's basically a split there, and they prefer, I think, not to see any kind of agreements made with Iran at the present.
So it's really, countries are torn by multiple reasons these days. I mean, you've got the Syria thing and this whole Sunni Shiite, and of course the Al-Qaeda seems to get their finger in the pie, and it's just kind of a sad situation. In spite of all that, are you hopeful, and this is going to have to be a quick answer, are you hopeful about the Middle East kind of settling down, I guess is for want of a better word?
Very good question. It's, I think it's going to play, I think there's a lot more to play out. I don't think it's going to
happen soon.
Settle down. Now, possibly with the latest situation is clearing up, it seems to be with Iran, I guess, and the nuclear situation. Possibly we're going to see some kind of leeway in permanent diplomacy and maybe getting things settled down. But I think there's more things to be played out yet myself.
Well, we're running out of time. This has been fascinating, at least from my part. I hope the viewers,
I hope for the audience.
I hope the audience finds it fascinating. I just want to thank you both for coming and being part of the show. I know people lead busy lives, and you're teaching now. John's retired, so he's not quite as pressured as you are.
No, I mean, it saves time. He does the shopping and some of the cooking, so.
So I want to thank you very much for being here. And to my audience, I've been very fortunate tonight to have as my guests Lona and John Healam, who spent time in the Middle East. Good night.